So if you live in your own flat and you're renting your own flat, not an Airbnb, what is the total cost that you can get by, like the basic cost you could get by and living in Bogota?
Um, Renting your own flat. I'm just having a look here. So I'm getting the figures exactly worked out. I would say, well, I'd say, yeah, just under $1,000 a month.
All right, so today we are heading down to Colombia in Bogota with my new amigo, Steve Hyde. Steve, how you doing?
Hi. Hi, Ray. Yeah, good. Everything's fine
All
here in
right.
sunny Bogota. Got good weather this today, which is nice.
Well, thanks for doing this, man. I appreciate it. I've really looked forward to doing one in Bogota. I've never been there. It is a city that I have a really strong interest in visiting and possibly even moving. I love Colombia. I love everything it offers, the food, everything. So I'm interested and eager to hear about Bogota. But tell us, Steve, a little bit about your background and how you found Bogota, how you landed there.
Well, I first came here in the 90s. I was actually 1990s. I was driving trucks, doing overland trips around South America. So I was leading those trips and used to come into Bogota by truck, which was always
Wow.
interesting. In those days, the roads were a lot worse. So I knew the city from the grim days, let's say, in the early, well, mid 90s was, with the war on drugs and Pablo Escobar. I'm sure everybody's seen Narcos.
Yeah.
So it was a bit edgy then. Medellin was even more edgy. So I kind of knew the city and I always loved it because it had this vibrancy about it and a good climate, from my opinion, as well. Being English, of course, we quite like the chillier weather
Yeah.
because we're up high 2,600 meters in the Andes.
Mm.
But I came back again over the years through other work and visited regularly for my jobs and then ended up marrying a Colombian, and we raised a family. We were living many years in Africa, but we ended up coming back here about 14 years ago. I think because of the kids, school age, wanting to have a bit of stability for them. And I've been here ever since. So yes, I consider myself almost what we call a Rolo.
Yeah.
Rolo's the local sort of slang for people living in Bogota. So yeah,
Yeah.
here I
How
am.
much, and you have kids.
Yeah, I've got two children. So yeah, one's at university, still at school.
Awesome.
So I've seen the family life here as well. Let's say raising them from young children in Bogota.
Wow. Very cool. Now, so when you were driving truck, I mean, was that for an English company or was that?
For an English tour company, they were like
Okay.
expeditions. So we used to do a 5 month trip right around South America.
Wow.
It was an amazing journey, and that's where I learned a little bit of Spanish. I fell in love, I think, with the Latin American cultures and obviously the Andean countries as well, because a lot of the time we were in the Andes, and there's a certain feeling and I think there's almost a power that comes from these mountains that's very special, and
Yeah.
you can feel it as well in Bogota. There's something unusual. It's the longest mountain range on the planet. It's one of the newest mountain ranges on the planet, and you can feel that, I think. And in Bogota, I think you can feel it as well. And I've always felt very comfortable with that.
Yeah. Okay, great. And you've been there now since 2012, you said?
Yeah, I mean, I was working here from 2011. So yeah, I would say, well, 13 years
Okay.
coming up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's jump into rentals because the viewers that are thinking about retiring or moving to Bogota, they want to have an idea and understanding what you can get a rental for
Mm.
in and around that city.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's a very, very big city. I mean, you've got 10 million people and there's huge different areas of the city. But I'd say as a rule of thumb, in a nice, what we call middle class area, not one of the richest areas, which is very expensive, but a nice middle class area, and we call that like Chapinero or Tosaquillo would be two good examples. Not so far from the city centre, but nice green areas. Um, yeah, I would say I'm just looking at my list of prices here. I would say you could you could rent like a small single bedroom flat for around about between $300 and $400 a month.
Okay.
You could get it cheaper, and if you're getting a larger flat and sharing it, obviously that cost will go down quite a bit.
Sure. Now, when you say cheaper, are you talking about moving further outside of the center of Bogota?
Yeah, I mean, Bogota is a city which goes from the sublime to the desperately poor. I mean, you've got areas like Rosales in the north, which would equate to Manhattan in terms of the quality of the buildings and security and everything else, and nice green spaces. And then you've got these middle class areas, and then you've got a large amount of areas, mostly in the south of the city, where you've got some pretty, poor areas, let's say working class areas, and then you could go down onto the mountains where you've got very poor migrants, people, also internal migrants coming from other parts of Colombia, literally
Hmm.
living under plastic with no water and electricity. So
Yeah.
you have this huge range. I mean, and in Colombia, they have this strange system called the strata system, or estrato, they say here. So
Strato.
you can actually divide neighborhoods. Neighborhoods are actually officially divided into different estratos. Now, those estratos don't only reflect the price that you might pay in terms of like square feet or square meters for the property, either to buy or rent. It also can reflect in the bills you pay. So here, for example, if I get an internet connection
Hmm.
to my flat, they'll ask me what strata am I in, and that will actually affect the cost of the package I'm getting. So that's something unusual. So in Colombia, especially in Bogota, you need to be aware of the strata system and say, well, ¿qué estrato? What strata are you in? I'm in strato 4, which is kind of, middle class, nice green areas, a bit dodgy sometimes at night. And we live close to other strato 3, strato 2 areas. We don't have, hugely rich people. We don't have super fancy cars driving around. It's like a fairly normal middle class area. And it's a nice mixed area. You can walk around and there's corner shops and everything else. And that's the area I would recommend most
Hmm.
people moving to Bogota to look for a Strato 4 area. Now, if you go downscale, if you go down to Strato 3 or 2, and some people do, and living more in what we call barrios populares, the
Yeah.
popular neighborhoods, okay, you're going to have a lot of loud music, might be a little bit less secure, a little less safe. You're going to still have a good life, and you're going to meet lots of lovely people. You'll learn Spanish super fast because you'll have to. And that would be, you could cut your costs down by a huge amount by living in those areas. And some people do. I mean, I know people have migrated to Bogota and they've felt very happy and they fitted into those areas. So, it's horses for courses. You can choose your strata. If you're very wealthy and you want to live behind huge gates, you can live in Strato 6 up north and you'll pay similar prices to New York.
Yeah. So if you go to like a strata in three, this- and you're
Yeah.
saying it's more vibrant, there's music, it's more active. I mean, what are the rentals going for usually in those areas?
I would say you would get rentals there for, $200. You'd have to look around and always negotiate.
Yeah,
Obviously, it helps a lot to speak Spanish or some Spanish.
sure.
If you are coming as a foreigner, you will obviously be charged the highest price.
Yeah,
I was
yeah,
asked
okay.
for a discount for
I
foreigners as a bit of a joke, and they sometimes give it to me, but not usually.
Yeah, I always tell people don't rent until you're down there for a few months and you kind of acclimate and get to know the community. Once the
Exactly.
community sees you on a regular basis, then they'll start trusting you. You can start negotiating and really find some great deals. But you got to really immerse yourself in the community, and some people are willing to do that, and some people aren't. It's just
Yeah.
kind of how it
And Ray,
is.
I mean, that's one of the important things. You touched on a very good point there because obviously right now, it is quite a good market to get Airbnbs, and you can get them quite cheaply. Part of the headache with renting here is they sometimes ask for, insurance and I don't know what they call it in English, but they want to have a co-signer on the rental contract, and they put these obstacles up, which is very
Hmm.
difficult for people just arriving here. Now,
Hmm.
Airbnb or Booking.com, all these other platforms, you don't have those issues. obviously you're going to pay a bit more. But right now, what I've seen, I've been looking lately, and it's actually a buyer's market
Hmm.
right now for those. There's a bit of an oversupply, and then of course COVID hit. The city went into lockdown like everywhere else, and I think there's more supply than there is demand. So
Hmm.
the word on the street is you can negotiate a very good price right now for Airbnb. Talk directly to the owners, or the same with booking.com. Find ways around to lower the amount, and
Hmm.
you can get a good deal. So
Yeah.
you do have, and you may find in the long term, even that option may be as um, as worthwhile as actually going out and formally renting a flat.
Hmm.
But also, like you say, you've got 2 or 3 months to improve your Spanish if you're learning Spanish, and also get to know the area you really want to live and see where the best prices are, and negotiate a good deal if you're planning to be here for several years. And then, of course, if you're going to plan to be here for several years, you might look at buying a flat
Yeah.
because that's reasonably cheap as well compared to most other
That
world cities.
that was my next question. What can you buy a flat for in Bogota?
Yeah. Okay. So I did some number crunching here, and I think you could, if you had 100,000 US dollars, you'd buy a pretty nice flat close to the center of Bogota in a fairly nice area.
Okay.
If you went to down to 50,000 US dollars, you could buy a much smaller, less nice flat in a strato 2 or 3 area. And probably in the kind of area where I live, strato 4, you could get a single bedroom flat probably for around about 70,000 US dollars, which to be honest is quite cheap compared to prices in other world capitals.
Well, especially yeah, and anywhere in the U.S. today, it's extremely expensive. So that 100K one that you noted first off, would that how large is that? Is that like a one bedroom, two bedroom, three bedroom?
Look, I mean, again, you have to. I would say you could get a 2 bedroom flat with a nice floor area for that, with a nice view in a
Okay.
strata 4 area. And
Okay.
you could if you were lucky maybe get a 3 bedroom, or they sometimes have these like cuarto de servicios, like a kind of, from the old days, they don't use them as that anymore, like a maid's room,
Yeah.
which you can use as a study or a guest room as well. So and I would recommend to buy in older buildings. New buildings much more expensive. I'm talking about prices for a flat that's maybe 40 or 50 years old, but there's lots of advantages in older flats. I personally live in a flat that was built in the 1950s. They were more solidly built. They got much thicker
Yes.
walls. You can't hear the neighbors as well, as much as you don't want to. And they've stood the test of time. They were very strongly built in those days, and I mean, it is an earthquake zone, Colombia.
Hmm.
Bogota is medium risk. So
Hmm.
if it's been around since 1950, it's probably not going to fall down
You're
tomorrow.
pretty good. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. All right. Now, when you rent a place in Bogota, are utilities included or are they separate? And if they're separate,
They're usually,
what do they
yeah.
run per month approximately?
Um, Okay, so I'm just having a look at my various prices here. Yeah, so basically you rent a flat here. Obviously, if it's an Airbnb, everything's included, so that may
Sure.
keep your costs down. Once you've rented your own flat and you have a contract for it, normally the contract would run for a minimum of 6 months. Okay,
Okay.
sometimes for a year. I usually would aim for a 6 month contract, gives you flexibility. Although you can break the contracts usually without too much hassle. But then you're responsible then for obviously the services like the gas, electricity, and then the water, rubbish collection, those kind of service charges that come in monthly bills. Then you'd probably put your own internet package in as well. You might want a TV with that as well, TV package. Um, and those costs, I'm just looking at it here, for a one bed flat, around about $100 a month.
Okay. And that's
Yeah.
for gas, electric, water,
And
garbage
a
pickup.
cheap internet package.
Oh, and it comes with that's including internet.
Well, I mean, if you've got an internet, you can get, of course, it's horses for courses. If it's just one of you and you don't bother with the TV and the phone included in the package, and and you've got your own Netflix, for example, you can pick that up for around about I would say about $30 a month.
Okay.
Okay.
For
Of
Wi-Fi.
course, yeah. And if your flat doesn't have gas, and you'd obviously cook on electric, and you'd put that cost into that. But I would
Yeah.
say for a small one-bedroom flat for a single person, about $100. Okay.
Okay.
Um, and then you have what we call a service charge, which is like an administration charge. Now that's usually included in the rent. But this is where you need to be careful, because when you rent a flat here, you need to check very carefully whether the owner is including the monthly service charge for the flat. Now, I say service charge, it's like the maintenance of the building that we all pay when we live in
Yes.
a communal building, as you would anywhere in the world. It should be included in the rent, but sometimes they don't, and they make you pay it apart. Now that can run to
Oh,
quite a lot of
interesting.
money, especially if you have guards on the building, like vigilantes.
Yeah.
That can make the building a lot quite more expensive because you're paying salaries. Um, and also, if the building has, for example, a lift, an electric lift, because it needs maintenance, all these things can add up. So you need to look very carefully whether that's included or not. And it should be included. If it isn't, then how much is it? Now, in
Yeah.
some flats, I've seen that run up to about, let's say, $100 a month. So that can add a
Okay.
huge whack to your rent.
Yeah.
Obviously, again, you get what you pay for. So, you're living in a nice, some flats are in big, blocks of flats that have a swimming pool, a gym, 24-hour guards. Of course, that's going to make the rent higher. And
Yeah.
that's going to, obviously, if you're buying it as well, make your administration or service charge higher too.
Okay.
So you've got to be aware of that. But you
Yeah.
normally get what you pay for. Let's put it
Yeah.
that way.
No, that's great info. Most of the time here in the States, if you buy a condo, you're going to be paying a
Mm.
maintenance fee. If you rent it, typically you don't. But
Exactly.
but they sneak it in sometimes in Colombia or in Bogota.
Well, they can do, yeah.
They can.
You need
Okay.
to be very clear to ask that straight away from the renter.
Okay.
Is the administration cost included or not? Now,
Okay.
some flats do actually also, for some various reasons, sometimes because they haven't, some reason they haven't, it's been a building, an old house that's been divided into flats. Some renters actually will include the service, like the gas and electricity also in the monthly rent. So that you do get all sorts of options,
Yeah.
and you get furnished flats
Hmm.
occasionally, a bit like an Airbnb, but probably not quite as good a standard.
Sure.
Um, and many flats will come with a few extras. They might have a bed there, they might have a fridge, they might have a cooker. They should have normally they would have a cooker. You don't have to
Hmm.
buy that. But yeah,
Hmm.
I mean, there's a whole variety. Most flats, on the whole, fairly empty, apart from a cooker,
Hmm.
and most flats will include the service charge.
Okay, cool. What do you guys pay for cell over there?
Well, I mean, I have a pretty good plan myself, and I get like 4G, and I get loads of data, much data as I ever needed.
Okay.
And I'm just trying to work it out into dollars, paying 90,000 pesos a month, um, which is about, it's around about $30.
$30. Okay.
Yeah. And of course, and I mean, that's a plan. If I go pay as you go, which many people will to start with, you obviously paying a little bit more respectively to pay on top ups.
Okay. All right, great. So getting around Bogota, do they have a metro? Metro. I'm sure they have rideshare. How do people get
That,
around? They probably have a public bus system that's pretty darn good, I'm guessing. How do
mm,
people get around and
well,
what are the costs associated with that?
okay. First of all, that's a very thorny question. The metro, they've been planning one
Uh-oh.
since about 1940. And if you asked anybody from Bogota about the metro, they'll probably, steam will start coming out of their ears.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
We've given up on that. I mean, they're building it and there's traffic jams everywhere because of it. But whether I will live long enough to see it, my kids say, Dad, we want you to live long enough to go on the metro. That's one of my goals in life. But in the meantime, they've got a system that's been running now for nearly 25 years called the Transmilenio, which is like a mass transit system. I wouldn't say it's rapid, based on bus lanes, dedicated bus lanes, and these big bendy buses. Now, it was supposed to be a temporary measure while they built the metro, but of course they haven't built the metro, so we still have it. It's actually it can be a horrific experience at peak hours. You are crammed in like sardines. It's highly insecure. It's not a very pleasant experience. It's makeshift and
Yeah.
dodgy. and it's not very secure. But if you go off peak hours, so that's any time after about 9 in the morning, or later in the afternoon, or rather early in the afternoon, or later in the evening, it's a pretty efficient way of getting around. I use it a lot. I use it with my family, and touch wood, I've never had any problems. But it's uncomfortable. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
You have a bigger and bigger bus system, and they've got gas buses now, so they're more ecological. And the bus system, again, it's pretty good. I mean, it spreads right away across the city to the remote parts of the city, the most far-flung areas, and I do use it quite a lot. Um, but again, it can be insecure. You have these mass robbings on buses, people coming on with guns. Never happened to me, but you hear stories. Um,
Mhm.
and it does cover a vast area, but of course, with all the traffic jams here, Bogota's got some of the worst traffic in the world. Take a good book is my advice. If you're not in a hurry and you have a book to read, it's great. Okay.
Yeah.
In terms of costs, it can be very cheap. If you buy like a personalized bus card, which you put money onto,
Hmm.
you preload it in an office and you put money on. But if you buy the personalized one that's linked to your name, and anyone can do this, you will reduce your costs a lot. And I would say you'll get like a couple of free bus rides within an hour. So you only pay once for an hour of bus rides, or an hour and a half, I think it is. So when you're traveling around, you can really reduce costs with this special it's like pay as you go
Hmm.
bus card. So I would say, I mean, I did some quick working out what I would pay, and I would say, I mean, it was just a small amount, to be honest. I would say like $10 a month for
Okay.
buses in Transmillennium. That's probably the maximum that I spend. But I would say 80% of my journeys through town are on a bicycle. Yeah. It's got great bike lanes here everywhere. Can be insecure at night, so I avoid cycling in some areas at night. But in the daytime, from 6 in the morning on, if I have to go anywhere in the city, I would always rather take my bike. And I mean, touch wood, I've been cycling here now for 14 years and never had an unfortunate incident, let's say. And it keeps you fit. So, it's a good way to get around, stay healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. I read an article not long ago where it indicated that Bogota is one of the best walking cities in the entire world.
Yep.
It was an article somewhere, I can't remember, but it's like maybe a couple months ago I read it and I'm like, oh wow, I know it's a big city and I know there's what you said, what, 10 million people? So I
Yep.
was like fascinated. I go, I love where you don't have to rely on a vehicle or buying a vehicle. I just like to be able to walk places or like you, bike. I love
Hmm.
biking, but walking, biking, or just if you got to go a little bit longer, call an Uber or ride share.
Exactly. Yeah, you don't really need a car here. Probably a waste of time having a car, and there's so many traffic jams anyway, and it's relatively expensive to run a vehicle. But yeah, I mean, we talk about these 15-minute cities. I did on my own little survey recently on how Bogota fits into that 15-minute city model. The idea that you've got everything within 15 minutes walk or bike ride from where you live. And Bogota is fantastic for that. It's a
Mhm.
huge city. It's very spread out. But most things you need are very close by. I've got two supermarkets 5 minutes walk away, and many more small shops. I can buy anything really that I need in
Yeah.
terms of monthly living
Mhm.
within a 5 minute walk from my flat. And I've got green spaces. I can walk to the mountains, or get a bus if I want to, or take my bike. Um, I, my medical, everything else is close by, hospitals, clinics. Usually, not always, but usually they're walkable or bikeable.
Yeah.
So that is a big plus for Bogota. Keep it local, buy locally, use your local resources. You don't need to move around the city. If you go across the city, it's to visit friends, it's to go out somewhere, do something nice. It's not normally because you have to.
I would fall in love with Bogota. How far, if you wanted to go to the beach, how far is the beach from Bogota?
Ah, well, okay. So, but you have to remember that Bogota, because it's high up in the Andes, is also very far inland.
Okay.
And the Spanish settlers, the conquistadors, they put it here so they didn't die of malaria and
Mm.
everything else on the lowlands. So we're
Mm.
very we're very far away.
Okay.
If I want to drive to the beach, it will take me in my car, which is very old and goes very slowly. It would take me the best part of 2 days. Okay,
Wow.
but
Okay.
I would enjoy the journey, and I'd stop off and do some things along the way. If I was to fly, a reasonably cheap airline would get me there within an hour.
Okay.
Okay, I could go to Santa Marta or maybe an hour and a half to Cartagena. I could be on the beach. So yeah, it's a flight or a long drive, a
How
road
much
trip.
are those flights out of Bogota to like Cartagena or
It
Santa
varies a
Marta?
lot, Ray. You've got like deals and everything else. If you're going in the peak season, it's relatively expensive compared to other countries' internal flights.
Hmm.
But I would say if I'm choosing the right moment, then I would say I'd probably get a flight to the coast for, $50 or $60.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe
Is-
and maybe $80 return. But
okay.
it's very variable. And you're getting bargains and deals all the time. You have to jump on them.
Yeah.
But I tend to drive a bit if because we have family as well on the coast. So if
Hmm.
visiting, I'd sometimes take the car and go for 2 weeks and make a road trip. And that's
Yeah.
lovely as well.
Yeah, that would be fun. Well, let's dive into restaurants. Everybody wants to, I mean, some of the most amazing food in the world is Colombian food, man. The soups, the
Oh
sopa.
yeah, the soups.
Oh, it's
That's
so
they're
good.
great.
I love it. But yeah, so like if you like give the viewers an understanding, if you go to like a local neighborhood Colombian restaurant, what would they pay for a meal in Bogota?
I would say that you would pay probably per person, including a beer, between $10 and $15 for a good restaurant. I
Okay.
don't mean super high class, but like, somewhere local you're going to walk to, but you feel like you've gone out.
Okay. So that's a
Um,
meal with a drink.
with a beer, a couple of beers, so that would be my range. Now, if I'm going to go to get what we call a set lunch, if I'm just going to go and have lunch out somewhere, and sometimes I meet friends for these lunches as well. They call them corrientazos. They are the workers, the office workers, any type of workers set lunch, and you have an option of about three or four different things on your plate, and they are fantastic. They're some of the best food you'll get, and you'll pay for that. I'm trying to think what the latest, probably around about $3,
$3 for a
and that's
nice
going to fill
lunch.
you up for the day. So if you're on a budget, you can go and have what they call a corrientazo, and you can have a good lunch for $3. And I worked it out actually. It's having a corrientazo for lunch, one of these set cheap lunches, is actually sometimes cheaper than cooking at home. So
Yeah.
if you've got a
Yeah.
tight budget, you might just want to go out for lunch every day.
Would that be like
And you'll find these everywhere, all over the city. Anywhere you just look around, see where the taxi drivers go, see where the students go, see where the office workers go, and you'll find your corrientazo, and you'll get
no
some really good food,
the
and it's healthy as well.
corrientazo, can you eat in the evenings too and find those kind of rates with the same type of food in the evenings, or is it typically for lunch only?
It's typically lunch, and these places
Okay.
keep the prices down by just not having to open in the evenings, and by having a lot of people come in a short space of time. So yeah, I mean, you may find like street food in the evenings, if you're eating empanadas or chorizo, sausage in a roll or something, or an arepa, like a corn dog. You'll get that kind of cheap street food. So if you're coming out of a bar or want a bit of a snack, you'll
Yeah.
find stuff very cheap on the street.
Yeah, yeah.
But it won't be that healthy probably, and it's not really a sit down meal. I mean, if you go out for like a McDonald's or something, I was looking at the prices, and a McDonald's here is like $7.50. But a lot of
Wow.
Colombians would see a fast food like McDonald's or Burger King as a luxury restaurant. They wouldn't
Yeah.
see it as a cheap restaurant. They'd see it as
Mhm.
something you go to for a treat once in a
Sure.
while. Whereas in
Yeah.
other countries like in Europe and America, you'd see it more as a kind of like, just a quick snack to get you going through the day.
Yeah, yeah. So if you break down like a monthly cost per restaurants, I mean, what do you think you'd pay?
I made a budget here going out meals and entertainment. I would say, depending on your lifestyle, but you could spend between 100 and $150 a month.
Okay.
Okay, that's
That's
including
including
things such as
entertainment.
cinemas. food go, if you go out for 2 or 3 meals, nice meals during the month, I would say I would budget about $150 max.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right, so let's dive into entertainment. Now, Bogota is a big city, has a lot of access to a lot of wonderful things.
Yeah.
What do you do for entertainment over there?
Well, yeah, I mean, you've got a lot of theatre here, and some very good theatre as well. Obviously, a lot of it's in Spanish, so that's going to be a bit of a restriction. A good way to improve your Spanish is to go watch the theatre. And of course, you've got cinemas as well. Um, and you have a few multiplexes that show the movies in the Voz Original, in the
Hmm.
original in soundtrack. So you can go and see movies in your native tongue, if it's assuming it's the movies in English. So there
Hmm.
is that as well. You can find those. And you've got cinema clubs, for example. You've got these nice bars now that show like rare and unusual and cult movies. You can have a beer and a
Nice.
pizza and watch a movie as well.
Oh, cool.
Um, a lot of art galleries. You've got some amazing art areas of the city where you've got um, colonies of artists and some really good stuff as well. You have, of course, a great graffiti culture here as well, which is quite remarkable. It's one of the
Yeah.
best cities in the world for graffiti, and some very well-known graffiti artists coming along. So there's all that stuff going on. You got street theatre where I live. I live in a part of the city which seems to attract a lot of theatre people, and I mean, we have the Philharmonic playing in the local park at Christmas for
Wow.
free. Then we have most weekends you can go down there and there's some kind of circus act going on or something happening in the park there. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, it's a very cultural city, very vibrant, and it's great fun walking around. You're never quite sure what you're going to see.
Are the museums and the galleries, are those free or do they typically cost something to get
They
in?
typically cost, but it's
Okay.
usually a small amount. I would say, you're talking about $3 or $4 maximum.
Okay.
Some are free. And I mean, they're a bit limited in museums. There's not that many. And once you've seen them, that's it probably. Um, but yeah,
Cool. And the last thing we have, everybody wants to know about this. This is the big one. Colombia is ranked in the top 10 by the World Health Organization as high quality healthcare. What can you tell us about it and how affordable is it for expats or retirees?
well, I find it incredibly cheap, I have to say. And uh, and I would say that what you pay for a start, you have this compulsory insurance system which everybody should sign up to. It's called EPS. And in that EPS, you have a choice, I don't know, about 10 different companies you can join. And then they then channel you to the health providers, which can be themselves as well, but could be like an external clinic. And you also have a vast network of private and reasonably cheap private clinics and laboratories and everything else. Now, in through the EPS system, I would pay you pay probably on average, I think, about 120 or $150 a month maximum. But it depends on your income because you're not really tested, means tested on your income, but you kind of declare what you've got and it
Hmm.
should fit in with your tax declaration.
Hmm.
And more or less it varies according to that. But I'd say the average person would pay between 100 and $150 max.
Okay.
Okay. So once you've paid that money, every time you get a health visit or you go and see the doctor, you pay a small amount extra. Okay. So in my case, I think because of my age, it's $1. So if I go and get a blood sample, $1. If I go and see the doctor, $1. If I go and see, I had yesterday, I had a scan of my thyroid glands. They were fine, by the way, but it was $1. So yeah, it's a pretty cheap system.
Wow. So that is the national healthcare program in Colombia, right?
Yeah, it's public-private system whereby you've got um, like the government, the Ministry of Health kind of supervises it, let's say, and is supposed to do quality control. To some degree, they do. But it is actually set up of private companies. Now, you do have like a fairly weak public health system as well in some public hospitals,
Hmm.
but they're pretty run down, and they're usually in areas where, for various reasons, they could be conflict areas of Colombia. You don't necessarily have the private companies setting up. But one thing I would say is that there are some things in the health system which I don't find work very well. Most things do, some things don't, and sometimes you want to do stuff and just pay privately and pay directly to a clinic
Hmm.
if you need to get a test done or something, or a diagnostic test. And so what we tend to do is, I think 90% of the things we do through the insurance scheme, and it's very cheap. Um, but then probably 10% of the things we say, no, we can't wait for that. We're going to just go and get it done. And then the thing about Bogota is you've got hundreds, literally hundreds of clinics, laboratories, diagnostic centers where you can just make an appointment as a private person. And then, of course, you're going to pay, I would say, I mean, I got a load of heart checks done in the last few years, where I decided just to go and pay privately. And I looked at the final bill, and it was about 400 US dollars. And I had
Hmm.
cardiologist, I had every imaginable test, I had color Doppler scans and everything else. And it was $400. Now, I imagine anywhere else in the world, it would cost up to 10 times that. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I would say anyone used to paying US prices, they'd find it quite a surprise. Yeah.
Bogota seems like a dream destination.
Well, I like it here. Not everybody's cup of tea. It's a big city. Sometimes you feel very small, but overall, I'm happy.
Yeah. Well, Steve Hyde, thank you so much, man, for sharing all of this information and tips on Bogota. I appreciate it. And thank you for doing the podcast.
Thanks, Ray. It's a pleasure.